All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this public address. It's a really good turnout here in the room, and we'll have a lot more people online as well. My name's Stephen Howes, and I'm the Director of the Development Policy Centre. And let me begin by welcoming you and by acknowledging the first Australians and the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Yeah, so when the prospect was first raised of hosting the Timor-Leste governor, someone, or the person inviting me, said, well, look, actually, he's spoken to the ANU before. And they actually linked to a YouTube segment. And there it was. And Helder actually came in 2013. And I was chairing. So I had a lot less grey hair then. That's one of the things. But otherwise, I'm pretty much doing the same thing, whereas, of course, you, Helder, have risen to great heights in the last decade. So it's great to have you back. Welcome back to the ANU. Please come back again, maybe in another decade. I may not be here, but you'll be very welcome.
Oh, you might be, Steve.
Yeah, so as I'm sure you all know, Helder Lopes is the Timor-Leste central bank governor, and he started his term last year, in September last year. It's a 6-year term. And before that, he was Vice Minister of Finance, which he's served, I think, twice in that role. And before that, before those roles, he was the Finance Minister, Chief of Staff, perhaps when you spoke to us last 10 years ago. He holds a master's degree in agricultural economics from Michigan State. So yeah, we're delighted to have you here. We know Timor-Leste is a great interest to many at the ANU and in the broader community. And I want to thank DFAT for making this opportunity available as well. We have the lecture today, and we'll take questions after the lecture, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And both from people in the room, and also if you're online, do put in your questions through the chat box, and we'll take those as well. We've got an hour for this session, and then after that, we're having a smaller roundtable where we'll be able to pursue a number of these issues. And thanks very much to Professor Warren McKibben, who will be chairing the second segment of today's proceedings. All right, so I think that's enough from me, and please welcome the Timor-Leste Central Bank Governor.
Thank you, Professor. It's a great privilege and delightful for me to come back to this university, to this institution. As the professor said, I was here in 2013, for Pacific Update, if I'm not mistaken. And since then, I haven't come back yet, so now I'm here. I would like to thank you for all of you, both presence here and online, for attending this presentation or this lecture. I will just provide you a general, a very high-level overview on Timor-Leste's economic challenges and performance, and also for some outlooks, in which I will also try to share with you of the government targets and strategy to achieve the targets. But in order to help you to assess the economy of Timor-Leste from the perspective of performance and challenges, I'll just provide you, as I said, general overview using macroeconomic indicators, just a few macroeconomic indicators, but I'm happy to take any specific questions if you have it. So with that, let me, this is sort of the outline of the presentation. As I said, these are the macroeconomic indicators that we'd like to share with you, with the data, to assess where we are now in terms of development and what are the challenges that we have. So we'll share with you on the economic growth, of which there are a few elements of the economic growth we'll touch upon. Inflation in Timor-Leste, employment, Now, when I talk about employment, I'll probably touch a little bit on Timor-Leste's participation in the Australian Pacific labor scheme, because I think it's very important, and also I can share some data with you on inbound remittance that we got overall, and also from Australia. And also talk about a little bit on the, I think it's only one slide on the public finance, which is more on the government revenue and budget, the monetary sector, which is the role of the central bank, trade sector or external sector, and what is the policy priority of the government to address challenges that we have and to achieve the targets. So if I could share with you in this first slide or in this second slide is the sort of some government targets, vision, strategies that the government has set. So we have, Timor-Leste has a strategic development plan which was established in 2011. So actually in the strategic development plan, the government set the vision of Timor-Leste to become an African income country with healthy and educated population by 2030. That vision was set in 2011. But from 2011 up to today, my personal view, I think the government has to review this vision, given that the limited time that we have to achieve the vision. But that is the vision that the government set. The second target that I will probably share with you is the growth target, economic growth target. The government set 5% of annual growth for this government for the next 5 years, which is very challenging because of actually the previous economic growth and the outlook that we, the central bank, the international financial institutions or organizations project 5% is probably a little bit challenging for the government, but it doesn't mean that we could not achieve that 5%. Inflation target, we don't have the monetary policy to sort of setting up the inflation target, but the government set up the inflation target of 4%. And actually they set this to guide them in using the fiscal instruments to achieve the target. And the private investment growth is according to the government, is about 10% annually, which is right now private sector investment is very high in the country right now. So we are doing a lot of work to attract investors to come in our country. Fiscal sustainability is a specific case in our country. Why? Because in our case we have a fiscal reserve called petroleum fund, but this petroleum fund is actually the revenue from the petroleum is depleting, and we need to make sure we have the sustainability of this petroleum fund to ensure our fiscal sustainability for long term. And the last one is financial sector development, which I want to have a robust financial sector development with a secure, accessible, digital, and inclusive financial services. So let me start with the economic growth in the country. So in 2000, after COVID, we are similar to the other countries, small countries in the region, where we are recovering our economy right now. For example, here, 2004, and now our economic growth is 4%, but in 2023, it declined to 2.3%. Why? Because our economy relies on government expenditure. Once the government expenditure is constrained, then the growth declined. Last year, the growth declined, the expenditure declined because it was election year. The public sector focused on the election instead of spending money for boosting the economy. For 2024 projection that comes up from central bank, from international financial institutions is 4.2%, but the government said 5%. So this is where the communication has to be there. If you said 5% projection is 4.2%, then what should we do in order to achieve the target? In terms of the economy size, actually our economy is relatively very small. It's about 1.6 billion of economy It's relatively very small. And the growth trend, if you look at the trend, the graphic down there, we actually experienced a great recession in our economy in 2020, which is I think the period of pandemic. But at that time, we also had a political crisis, which resulted in the contraction in our public expenditure. That's why it resulted in a very high negative economic growth. So in terms of whether we are in the right path of diversifying our economy, the answer is yes or no. Mainly yes or no. Because of what? If you look at that trend, from the production approach of which sectors contribute to our economy, actually our economy, agriculture is relatively stable, contributing about 20% to the GDP, but it's declining in 2023 down to 18%. The rest actually public sector, like construction there, despite construction contributes about 9%, public administration, these are associated to the government expenditure. So it's mainly government expenditure. So that is why we were saying petroleum fund is extremely important, because petroleum fund is the one financing government expenditure. If we don't have the petroleum fund there, government expenditure is not there, growth is going to be a problem. On the other side, when we use the expenditure approach to understand the contribution of the sector to our economy, as I said, private sector is very small. And since day one of our independence up to today, if we exclude export of oil and gas in our international trade, then we always experience a trade deficit. Normally we call it non-oil trade. If in non-oil trade, we always experience trade deficit. So this is the problem. And I think that is why the government is now working very hard. Everybody is now working very hard to make sure that now we need to increase this blue bar. The blue bar has to be picking up. Otherwise, for long term, Timor-Leste growth is not sustainable. On the inflation last year was very high, 8.4%. This year, the projection is about 4.5, still slightly higher than the target, which is 4%. But up to today, based on the recent data that the central bank has, the inflation is around 3%. So if we keep maintaining this trend, then we will probably well below the target or above the target, that's just slightly above the target. But the most important thing here is that our inflation, whether the inflation is high or low, the main driver is the price of cereals, especially rice. Once the price of rice is high or picking up in rice-producing countries, we will have inflation in the country because Timorese eat a lot of rice. Now, the point that I would like to make is that rice is actually in our CPI basket is the one that account a lot of weight. So once the rice prices increase, then inflation in Timor-Leste is high. So this means two things. One is that for the rice production at the international level, we can't control. So that is why using American dollar to some extent could control the effect of price volatility at the international market because the stability of American dollar. But in the meantime, we, the government, Timor-Leste authority, we have to work on increasing the production, work on two things: increasing rice production locally, or and also improving the efficiency of supply chain in the country. Supply chain here, I refer to making sure there is no bottlenecks in the supply of goods, because sometimes infrastructure is the problem. Road to connect from, let's say, production side to the to distribute to the consumer to the market, that's an issue. So that sometimes to some extent contribute to the very high price in different places. This is just to compare, where we are now in terms of the economic growth with our peers in region, in this developed country, given that we are still part of this LDCs and also the Southeast Asia. So now actually just to show you economic growth and inflation, Timor-Leste with this group of countries. Okay, let's move to the another indicator, macroeconomic indicator to assess Timor-Leste economy's employment. So Timor-Leste, as you probably follow us, we are one of the most young population country in the world. I think it's about over 50% of our population is below, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure. I think it's below probably the age of 30. So we are very young. But the problem that we have, and this is the systemic problem that we have since day one of our independence, employment creation. The capacity of our economy to create employment is still very low. So that is why, So that's why we, Timor-Leste, to participate in Australia, I don't know how we call that program, Pacific Labour Scheme. Pacific Labour Scheme is extremely important because we cannot absorb these young people. You can absorb, they come, they work, so they actually help us solve our problem. So, but let me, that is sort of population. Our population is very small. I think it's probably just twice the size or 3 times size of Canberra, right? Because ours is only 1.34 million. I understand that Canberra is around 500 or 600 thousand. Okay. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that well, we have a young population. The economy has a limited capacity to absorb them in terms of creating employment. And another problem that we have is that labor force participation is very low. If you look at the graph here, you see that despite we have a lot of young people, but they don't participate in the labor force. Only 30% of them participate in the labor force. So this is very low, and we try to understand why. But what we have identified is because some people go, try to find jobs, but they don't find job, so they already give up. And I don't want to continue looking for job because job is very difficult to find. Some people already come to that point, but not many, not all people. And also, our economy is dominated by informal sector. So despite we have here, if you can identify based on our last labor force survey, unemployment is only 1.1 or 5.1%, but the employment that is we say employment, most of them are actually, many of them actually work in informal sector, especially in subsistence agriculture. It's not really a secure job. But this is the challenge that we have. We call it a systemic challenge in our economy. That is why everybody is now working on bring private sector to invest, employ our people. Otherwise we cannot solve the problem. The formula of us to solve power or to address poverty in the country is private sector to invest, private sector create jobs, jobs create income, income contribute to the poverty reduction. That's the formula that we have right now. So, and if you look at which sector, which industry that actually producing or generating jobs for the people, it's actually in our case, public sector is the one producing or generating a lot of jobs compared to private sector. And in this case, it's not sustainable because public sector relies on petroleum fund. And if the petroleum fund is no longer there, we don't have money to pay people and no jobs. So that's why, as I said, back to the point that I made, private sector is the key because private sector will help us to create jobs. This is an interesting thing, and I think this is very associated with most of us here because this is about the remittance. I think in the beginning I was mentioned about the growth of remittance. So since 2009 up to 2023, the inbound remittance continue increasing. In 2023, the inbound remittance is $204 million US, representing 12.6% of our GDP. It's huge. remittance is huge. And how much Australia contribute to that? Our people who come work here contribute to that. They contribute here 43.4 million US dollars in 2023 for inbound remittance to us. So it's huge, it's big. And if I'm not mistaken, our total export for 2023 is probably less than 30 million US dollars. So it implies that remittance from our people working in Australia is already exceed the value of the export that we had for the entire last year. And most of the remittances coming from UK, because we have a lot of people working in UK with their own initiative. Actually, the one that the government initiated scheme program is with Australia, with South Korea, and with Japan. And as I said, Australia contributes significantly on this. And that is why we think that it's very important for us to continue have a cooperation with Australia, to continue send our young people to come work in Australia. So there are two things that we expect from the existing scheme. One is to increase the quota, where we can send more people to come. Second is that our people that are working here right now is mainly working on the farm, low skill. We will expect that some of our people will also take up some of the semi-skilled jobs instead of low skill. But to do that, I think that the DFAT and the government in Timor-Leste, they are working on preparing our people, language, the proper skills in order to take up some of the semi-skilled jobs. For the public finance, what I would like to explain here is that this is just one slide of the government revenue and expenditure. But the point that I would like to make here is that government revenue, which is we call it domestic revenue, in this, I think that the general term that the people normally use is tax revenue, only accounts for about less than 20% of our annual budget. So then the question is, where is the over 80% coming from? It's coming from the petroleum fund, the sovereign wealth fund. That is where the sovereign wealth fund is extremely important, as at least from the perspective of the central bank, important in the sense of the sustainability of the petroleum fund will ensure the sustainability of the fiscal policy, the sustainability of fiscal policy and macroeconomic stability, because it accounts for over 80% of our annual budget. And where does the government spend this money? Once they make the budget, most of the money is actually in our system. We put in 5 categories: paying labors of the public sector, which is salary and wages. We put in the goods and services. Actually, the capital and development is the one that we really put money in infrastructure for investment. Big chunk of money is mainly for consumption instead of investment. But we understand that the public institution is also continue growing. It requires expenditure for institutions. But I think for the sustainable economy, you need to invest more on this level on investment. So in order to help us understand it, or understand what are the pros and cons of using American dollar to our economy or to the entire country. And from there, we will then make a decision. Make a decision in the sense that if the study finds that pros outweigh cons, then we'll continue to maintain the dollar. But if cons outweighs pros, then we have to think of whether we continue or we change the regime. But it has to be based on the study. And the central bank view is that if we come to the point where we have to think about changing regime, currency regime, it has to be economically and technically motivated, not politically motivated. That's our view. But of course, by the end of the day, the politicians are the one to make decisions. But our view is that it has to be economically and technically motivated, and three conditions that we think we have set. If we come to the point of changing a currency regime, Timor-Leste have to have a strong current account, strong fiscal account, and they have central banks so that to some extent has reserve. Because when you change the regime, central banks will be able to make interventions if needed, and the interventions requires reserve. If you don't have reserve, you can't make intervention. On the existing industry, we only have 5 banks, commercial banks in the country, 4 foreign and 1 local. And of the total financial institution assets is about, I think, 2.4 billion. And out of the 2.4 billion, about 1.8 is liquid assets. So our financial institution is very liquid, very liquid. But the problem is that this liquid asset is not channeled to our economy through credit, but most of the financial institutions place this asset overseas. Because of what? Because of our, according to them, the lending environment in the country is very risky. And also we don't have instruments, asset instruments where they can invest, such as we don't have government bonds or any other instrument where they can invest. So the only option that they have is like provide a little bit credit, taking some risk, provide a little bit credit, but then the rest you invest overseas. So that's why the central bank is now working very hard to improve regulatory environment to unlock this risk, to facilitate the credit market penetration. But we will also expect that the banks will also take some risk by channeling this liquidity to the economy. So this is just give you information about of 1.8 liquidity sitting in the banks, only about 440 million that is channeled to credit. Very small. And the interest rate is around, it's still double digit, around 10%. And then it becomes to the sector, I think in the beginning it was mentioned, potential sector to diversify the economy, such as agriculture sector, yet only, like in 2023, only less than 2 million credit for agriculture sector. It's very small. How come you diversify this economy if this private money is not going to this sector? But that is our job. We have to work on it. And also at the tourism sector, for example, less than 20 million of liquidity in the bank goes to credit for this sector. So it's a big challenge for us. We need to work on the soft and hard side of unlocking risk in the credit market in Timor-Leste. Most of the lending is actually for the individuals because people just use their salary or the wages as the guarantee, and it's very safe for the public institutions. It's safe for me. You take loan, I deduct your salary every month, no risk for me. But the rest, we don't have land title, and it's risk for them. For the external sector, this is just to provide you the information. External sector is referring to the import and export that we have in the country. As I said, since day one of our independence up to today, if we exclude oil and gas as export commodities, then we always in the trade deficit. But if we include, then in some years we are in trade surplus, but not recently. Why? Because recently, especially last year, because of the huge decrease in the oil production. So even though you include oil, we still experience huge trade deficit in our economy. So that is why, back to the point that I make, private sector produce locally is extremely important. And this is just to give you what we import, what we export, and to where, and where are the import and export coming from. I don't think Australia is coming to the picture in terms of like import, because Indonesia is the majority here. Oh, Australia is there. So import, we actually import about 8% of goods from Australia, and for about 44% from Indonesia. The rest is from others. And for the export, we export mainly to Indonesia, to Malaysia, and to Singapore. And if you look at the tables, these are products that we import. So despite we have oil and gas, we produce oil and gas, we actually import a lot of petroleum products, because our oil and gas is not, how do we call that, not refined in our country. So we have to buy these products again. So then comes to the point of what is the strategy? What is Timor government strategy right now? So the government strategy right now is vibrant private sector-led economic growth. If you ask every single government members with a portfolio of economy, they will say private sector. I think even they will dream about private sector. But to attract private sector, this is what we have identified. When I say we, because like in the government economic team, they also call upon us, central bank, to be part of it. So we have identified these 5 key policy strategies to support the growth of private sector. One is continue invest in infrastructure, human capital. For us, this is key. You can't compete with Indonesia just next door. Even Indonesia is probably too big. Just West Timor, if you don't have a proper infrastructure or human capital in place. So we need to continue investing in this. Efficient laws and regulations. This is extremely important, because we have discussed with a lot of private sectors. Some people are interested, and in fact, I think next month, we will have a business forum for Australian businesses in the country. But I believe this will come to their mind, and they will, for some of them, will probably ask the questions: how efficient is the laws and regulations in the country to provide us security, or to protect our investment, or to give us confidence to invest in the country? So that's why we work very hard on this. Another element is efficiency and bureaucracy. Efficiency in bureaucracy and coordination of the government. Efficiency in this sense is that you need to make sure that in our public sector delivers an efficient service, really facilitate the private sector. Now, when it comes to the coordination, this is a sort of a challenge in the developing country like us. Now some institutions may really want to sort of opt this sort of vision, say about private sector. But some institutions, one institution may go with the pace of Formula One, but another one will go with the pace of bicycling race. So it's not really to the same pace, and this is a problem. So that is where the coordination is to be there. And access to finance is key, especially for small and medium enterprises, because small and medium enterprises, in our case, is actually the segment that normally financial institutions ignore them because too risky. And the last one is, of course, market expansion. For us, Timor-Leste, with small land size, which is a challenge for economics of scale. Like if you want to do massive production, small size is a big challenge. With the small population size, market is small. And also on top of it, small per capita. The purchasing power is also low. So when you consider this whole thing, you say, well, why should I produce in Timor? Why should I invest in Timor? But the idea is that making Timor-Leste as a hub, you come to Timor, invest in Timor, produce in Timor, but don't think of just selling in Timor. Sell overseas, which is the big market. For example, if you are an Australian investor, let's say a beef producer, producing Timor is probably, in terms of cost, is lower than in Australia. You come and produce in Timor, you can bring back to Australia for the quality check, etc., and then sell to Indonesia or whatever. But what I'm saying is that in terms of the market, from the perspective of the market, Timor-Leste may not be attractive, but we are working on making ourselves as a hub where that initiative could attract people to come and invest, and then they can access to market in the region around the world. So this is sort of a general overview of where we are, what are the challenges that we have, what are our few years, and I'm very happy to share this with you, and I'm happy to take any questions, even specific questions if you think it's necessary to ask. Thank you.
Very much. So that's very comprehensive and interesting presentation. We're open for Metronista questions. Yeah, Warren.
Warren McKibben from ANU. Very interesting presentation. There was one sentence in your discussion of finance where you said there is no property rights. That's got to be fundamental. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that as a driver of the private sector.
Should I answer?
Yeah, please. I'll take it one.
Okay, that's a very important question, because to attract private sector, no property right, don't dream of attracting private sector. That's what we understand. So this government, especially the Minister of Justice, he is very determined to push for the land titling reform in the country. We have the law already, but I think they have to work on some auxiliary regulations in order to allow them to issue land title for individuals, for the people. And I think we have the cadastral data already. What we need to do is, now we just need to have auxiliary regulations that allow them to do a proper titling. The problem with why it took, it takes too long for us to come to the land title, because we have different story. Now we have a traditional land, which is I think similar to Australia, but in terms of land titling under different administration, that is where we have the problem, because we were under Portuguese administration, Indonesian administration, and then we become a country. So when you try to bring this all complicated issue into one table and try to address, making sure everybody is happy, that is the challenge. But I think understanding the importance of diversifying the economy with private sector to sustain land title is a big issue. So in our sector, the financial sector, the financial industry or the financial players saying that I will not give you credit if there is no guarantee. In this case, we have two guarantees. Fixed guarantee is fixed asset, which is land, or with movable assets. So because fixed asset land is the mandate of the government, what we, the central bank, do is we advise the government to push the land reform. We just last week, the central bank actually present a law to the government and parliament, or to the government, on using, how do we call it, movable assets. We call it secure transaction law, to use, to allow people to use their movable assets as collateral to access to credit, because this will unlock the risk of accessing to credit. So what we could do is we push for that, but we are also expecting the government to accelerate the land reform.
I'll just check if there are any questions online, not at the moment. So please, if you are online, put your questions in the chat box. And got a question at the back.
Thank you, Lucy from DFAT. You mentioned right at the start the vision the country had for 2030, the million ton country, a healthy and educated population. If the central bank had the power to change that vision, what do you think it should be?
Big question. It's a tough question. My advice would be the government to review the existing vision and setting up a realistic vision. Because this vision was set over 2 decades, over a decade ago. And given with the progress that we have, challenges that we have, and the time that the short time that left, I think the best advice would be the government to revise the vision and setting up a realistic vision aligned with this private sector development for sustaining the economic growth. Because right now, I think that the vision is very difficult to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a couple of questions from our distinguished colleagues.
I have two questions. The first one, at the beginning, you mentioned that the share of agriculture has declined dramatically over this period. And the majority of people live in the agricultural sector, and therefore promoting the agricultural sector, supporting the agricultural sector has to be a key priority. As you correctly pointed out, your hands are tied on the monetary policy side. Okay. And what are the other alternatives you have to promote the agricultural sector? Is there anything that you can do on the trade policy side? I mean, your economy is fully open and the import duties are very low. I'm not talking about quantitative restrictions. Isn't there any way of using tariff policy to redress the issue? By looking at your macro story, that the internal terms of trade would have moved against the agricultural sector dramatically during that period. The second tiny question is, when you talk about trade patterns, you did not mention about illicit cross-border trade with Indonesia. I think the trade data grossly understate actual trade because there's a lot of illicit trade with Indonesia.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know, I wish to answer the first question of measures for tariff when I was still in the Minister of Finance, because this is actually the mandate of the Minister of Finance. So what I understand from the policy of the government, especially from the Minister of Agriculture, in terms of agriculture development, is twofold. One is increase the productivity. Actually, twofold. One, increase the productivity for food security and for income generation. That is actually the sort of objective right now in terms of agriculture development. So when it comes to whether we have to come with some measures on tariff to protect our domestic production, I haven't seen any sort of trend or discussion on this. But what I think the government is very, okay, first our economy is very open. And the government, I haven't seen any appetite to take these tariff measures to protect production. But what we are doing right now is that, especially our domestic private sector, together with the government and the farmers, they are now focusing on producing rice because we eat a lot of rice, we import a lot of rice. So what they need to do is that when they go with this product, they increase the production and they will come with so-called import substitution policy. To do that, they will probably gradually implement that. So they increase the domestic production and they come with the data of, let's say our consumption is 100 tons, hypothetical number, 100 tons per year. But we produce domestically by 20 tons per year. Then I think that will probably advise the government, or then that will probably help the government to think of whether we should come with a measure of quota or tariff. I think, but the government, what we are focusing on right now is increasing the production. Now we need to make sure we have some activities on the ground that really push the production, and that would help the government to think of any measures to be taken. On the illicit trade, yeah, I apologize. I don't have the illicit trade data here because the actually central bank only record the legal trade data. So that's the problem. I think, Professor, you are right. There are a lot of illicit activities at the border, especially the land border, which is not officially recorded. but we do, especially on tobaccos. Because last time I was part of the government, but then they moved me. So the previous administration, they increased tax for tobacco with the idea that, okay, increase tax of tobacco will make the price of tobacco high. People will not smoke because our population, most of the population smoke. That's the idea. But once they introduce this policy, what happened? Encourage a lot of illicit trade of tobacco. And then when we come to the parliament, even the parliament members say, well, we think this policy is not achieving its objective, because actually, you know, actually a lot of legal tobaccos now, even the price of a pack of cigarette is lower than before because of the illicit. So then we have to change again this tax policy because of that. So you are right, a lot of illicit activities on that.
Okay, we are running out of time, and we've got a couple of questions online. So perhaps also, how many people are online?
We've got about 26 people online. So three specific questions around three specific sectors. So Eric asks, what role could forestry play in future development? And then we have two questions from Almarindo. He asked, would it be possible for Timor-Leste to develop a cow fattening industry as a source of exports to Indonesia? And he also asked if Australia is exporting any cows to Timor. And second, Amarendo also asks, how can the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries help establish a fishing industry in Timor-Leste?
Okay, very
So,
specific questions.
so yeah, forestry, cows, and fishery.
I think this whole question should be addressed to the Minister of Agriculture.
Yes.
Anyway, forestry, we have potentials, but not massive. I would say, you know, we can develop forestry, but if then we talk about the scale, I don't think, you know, we are comparable with other countries. So we have resources, but not massive. Second is on
Cows, fattening of cows.
If you ask my personal view, I will expect, you know, some of the cow producing companies in Australia to produce in Timor. And how to do that? So we need to make sure we have a proper regulatory environment. Our cost is low, labor cost is low, tax is low, logistics is low, and then you go there, you produce there, you pack there, you bring back to Australia, or you can have a quality control there, you export directly to Indonesia or to other markets in the region. That's what we really want, because that is actually probably one of the sectors that we could promote if we would like Australia to step in, Australian private sector to step. Fisheries, me personally, if you look at the endowment per se, Timor-Leste should focus on fisheries. You know, otherwise we miss big opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I know Hal's been waiting, so it's brief.
Hilda, thank you very much. A really interesting presentation. One of the really important positive stories is surely your relationship with Indonesia, given the history, a very complicated history. Are there any particular issues in the bilateral relationship that you want to have addressed? My impression as an outsider is it's a pretty harmonious relationship. I imagine, for example, a lot of your youth are going to get trained in Indonesia. So that'll be a big part of the story. But is there anything in particular you want to focus on? Just on the training, by the way, I think Indonesian universities, public universities, treat Timorese students as nationals. That is, they don't regard them as foreign students, which is a big plus.
The diplomacy stance, you know, I think we have one of the best diplomacy relationship given the past history. And in terms of the border control management, you know, we have the most secure or very good relationship on that. I will probably provide my view of our relationship with Indonesia. we actually got a lot of positive spillover from there instead of negative. And we would like to continue capitalize on this. When I say the spillover, both positive spillover, both economics positive spillover, cultural, even like education, etc., etc. So we think that in our continue maintaining or strengthening the good relationship with Indonesia and Australia are extremely important, both for our economy and beyond the economy.
No challenges at the moment.
I don't think challenges outweigh benefits. So what our authorities, our government now focus on positive side of it instead of identifying the challenges and trying to address the challenges. Because as I said, we got a lot of positive spillovers, and we want to focus on this.
Yes, great.
Brandon from Monash. Just a quick comment on or question about the last slide where you looked at the priorities of the government. For example, if we take access to financial services, one of the big challenges, the cost of borrowing is huge, 17% business borrowing rate. And that kind of relates to the left-hand side, infrastructure, human capital, efficient laws. In other words, there's high risks in the economy. It's a difficult business environment. But how do we address those things on the left? Because they've been priorities for a long time, but there hasn't been a lot of movement.
So you are referring to infrastructure, human capital, or the access to finance?
Laws and regulations and bureaucracy, like the land law you gave example. That land law's been in draft in action for several years, but the next step hasn't moved forward. Yeah.
If I observe the dynamic in the government right now, I think the easiest way in terms of addressing this priority is probably laws and regulation. Because if the government willing to do this and make it a law for it, it's easy. That's probably the easiest way. But when it comes to enactment and implementation, I think that's probably the tough one. On infrastructure and human capital, this is what we have been dealing for a long time. And while working on these sectors, we are learning, but we are also running out of options in the sense of financial resources. So we need to make sure that the financial resources that we have right now, we use properly to invest in infrastructure and human capital. Sometimes we, the central bank, think that, okay, we can compromise sustainability of petroleum fund, because petroleum fund is by definition is asset in money, right? But if the government take this money and put in infrastructure, put in or human capital, then you just change the form of asset from money to infrastructure and to human capital. It's fine. But if you take money and consume, that is the issue for us. Access to financial services, you are totally right, Professor. And I think we met in Timor several times, right? So, special access in financing in Timor is very limited in the sense of nominal money that the individual and the private sector access. The cost of borrowing is high, especially the SMEs. SMEs is a huge problem. But we, the financial sector, have identified why. One of the big elements why SMEs or even the private sectors, the medium-sized private sector in the country, it is very difficult to access to finance. Now, an important element is accounting standard. Sometimes companies, they come to the bank asking for loan, but then the loan or the bank asks, where is your balance sheet? I want to see the balance sheet. They don't present the balance sheet. But sometimes they present the balance sheet, that balance sheet is not properly audited. If I am a credit officer, I will say, thank you so much. I don't trust your information. I don't give you the loan because it's too risky for me. So what we are now doing is that we should have the law and regulations where it defines, companies to come to follow the proper accounting standard that will help them, when they try to access to financial services, but also to formalize them to the formal sector of the economy and also once they pay tax. So that is what a lot of things that we are working on, but we are very confident that together, if we are in the driving seat, that we would like to go back, and if we can grab our friends from, let's say, Australia, Indonesia, or somewhere else to come along with us, then I think we can achieve something.
Okay, good. We are running out of time. I think we'll give that's the last question.
Thank you, Professor.
One of our students.
Well, thank you, Governor, for being here. Actually, Governor was my teacher. It was my English teacher. I speak English very terribly.
Long time ago.
Yeah, I have two questions here. The first is regarding to the first priority on infrastructure and human capital. But if we are talking about human capital, there are two imbalances there. In terms of the state budget, we have been talking about human capital since 2011 with the SDPs, but it does not really reflect on the state budget that are allocated to the education. And I wonder if, like in that strategies, because I have understood that the yearly budget is less than 2% of the total budget for education.
It's about 5.
Is it about 5? And also, if we want to take the standards of OECD for LSE, it's like 20%, then is there any plan for government to increase the budget on education? And second, probably it's not related to what your presentation, but I read in the news that in recent World Water Forum in Bali, as I read from the move, it's that there is a sort of like policy shift in terms of the because so far the ADB has been providing loan for us in terms of the infrastructure, but our prime ministers met with the vice president of the ADB that they will cancel the loan, pending the loan, that they did a loan. But at the same time, also the next day meeting with the prime minister from China to request China assistance in infrastructure in terms of the water infrastructure development. Could you please go with thank you.
The second question is, I can't answer that because it's more on the government mandate, but I will probably try to explain that from our perspective. When I was in the ministry, I know the background of it because I used to work in the treasury, so I know what is the policy sort of direction is in terms of the public debt. But let me answer the first question, which is, the first question is very important, and I don't think Australia experienced this. In developing countries like us, people always say, well, investing in human resources or human capital is important. Please put more money. Everybody agree with that. But one thing that I believe developed country doesn't have the experience is institutional capacity to use the money. I used to be the vice minister of finance. That everybody comes say, why don't we put more money? Like Indonesia put 20% of the budget to education. Why don't we at least increase to 10% or 15% of our budget to education? And I say, that's good, I like it. But then I say, well, let's look at the data of the budget of Ministry of Education a few years ago. So we say, I give this amount of money, but they only, let's say I give 100 million of money, but they only spend 70 million of that. And next year they come and say, because the sector is important, please increase the budget. Me as the Minister of Finance say, hold on, something is wrong. I can give you the money because the sector is important, but your capacity is not really there. So everybody agree that the sector is important, but we also have to work on the capacity of the institution to execute the money. I think that's the challenge that we have. And I don't think Australia has this experience because you have the capacity to use the money. When it comes to the point of the second question, my knowledge and my experience when I was in the Ministry of Finance, when we come to, we call it external loan for project financing, there are actually 2 or 4 factors that we have to consider. One is we call it cheap money. Cheap money means that you have to compare the cost of borrowing with the opportunity cost of petroleum fund investment return. That's called cheap money. Second is, we call it a technical know-how. So if you use your own money to do the project, then you will not get technical know-how from other international financial institutions because you don't use their money. Their money normally attached with technical assistance where you get the technical know-how to get to implement the project. The third element is, we call it the credit history. Given that we still have the petroleum fund, we have to leverage from the petroleum fund to create a good credit history for the country. Once you have good credit history, and in the future, if you don't have the money, you come to the World Bank, ADB, or etc., they will say, oh, Timor-Leste is good. They used to get borrow our money, they pay well, so we don't have the problem, give them money. But if they don't have this credit history, and suddenly you come and say, well, I need the money. Hold on, I don't have your credit history. I can give you money with very high cost. So that was another idea. And the last one is, we call it with quality of the project. With them, with the project lending for projects from external financial institution, they tend to support us to ensure the quality of project because they bring the technical know-how rather than we use our own money. This was the 4 factors that drive the policy to go for the external loan for financing infrastructure. With regards to the policy shift, I have no problem. But,
All right, well, we are out of time. So I'm sure you will agree, whether you're here or online, that you've really invested with a high return. I think we all know a very comprehensive, very frank presentation. So please join me in thanking you.